On this week's program, our guest is former U.S. Secretary of Defense William S. Cohen. A Republican, Secretary Cohen served 3 terms as U.S. Congressman from Maine, 3 terms as U.S. Senator from Maine, and 4 years as U.S. Secretary of Defense under President Bill Clinton. Currently, Secretary Cohen is Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of the Cohen Group. Mr. Secretary, good to sit with you once again.
It's been 40 years.
Is that right? We go back that far?
40 years.
40 years, you were probably a representative in Congress, right?
A young congressman then, yeah.
Young congressman, Republican from Maine.
Right.
So 3 terms as U.S. Congressman.
Right.
So that's 6 years, right?
Right.
And then 3 terms as Senator from Maine, so that's 18 years.
Right.
And then Secretary of Defense.
Right, 4 years, yeah.
How does that happen when, so you got a Democratic president, President Clinton at the time. 1996, I think you had just kind of ended your service, and you're going to set up a company, or you're packing boxes. How does it all happen?
We were packing boxes.
You were?
Yes. In fact, I had just signed an agreement to lease an office in downtown Washington for the Cohen Group as such, and got a call from the White House. Someone from the White House said, or asked, would you like to have lunch with the president? I said, sure.
Were you surprised? I mean, out of nowhere?
I was. I didn't really know him. We had shaken hands on maybe 3 or 4 occasions during formal events. So he wanted me to come down to meet with him, and all we did that day, we had lunch and just talked philosophy. Then another call came through, would you like to meet the president again? And that was the first really substantive conversation we had.
Wow.
And then it was very, very easy. He was saying, look, you know, this is going to be tough for both of us, basically. There were lots of Democrats who were not eager to see a Republican in a Democratic administration. They had a lot of talented people. That's a pretty tough job. And there were a lot of Republicans who said, what are you going to do serving a Democratic president? So there were some issues we had to talk through. But I assured him, I said, Mr. President, I'll guarantee you, if you offer me this position, if I accept, you'll never have to worry about me going around the back door and talking to my friends up on the Hill. Guess what these Democrats are doing down here at the White House? And I said, just if I join your team, I'll be a loyal member. And secondly, I need something from you. I need you to guarantee me that you will never ask me to participate in a political discussion. And he said, you got it. And that's how it came about. I promised him loyalty, that I would support him in every way, unless there was some fundamental issue on which I could never agree with and which would force any kind of a confrontation. Absent that, I said, I'll be a loyal part of your team, and was.
What were the toughest issues that you had to deal with as Secretary of Defense? So we're talking about 97 through 2001.
January 2001.
Okay, what would be the toughest decision you had to make, and maybe what you thought your greatest accomplishment was?
Well, there were a lot of decisions. The defense budget was certainly had been in decline. The so-called peace dividend had been in effect for some years. So the real problem in terms of how could you carry out the missions of the department with the budget that had been kind of a ceiling put on it by OMB and the Congressional Budget Office on Capitol Hill with Speaker Gingrich and others hadn't reached this agreement. So that was one tough issue in terms of how do you manage the department and do all the missions with the money that you have. Secondly, issue came up in terms of whether to go to war over in Bosnia, Kosovo. That was a tough decision.
Wow,
right?
yes.
And then the other one was going after Osama bin Laden. That was one, and also going into Iraq in terms of an operation called Desert Fox, attacking Saddam Hussein. So those were the bigger issues in terms of putting young men and women in harm's way.
Yes.
Those were all heavy decisions to make, and the carrying out of the air campaign, which was the longest air campaign since World War II at that time. So it was a 78-day campaign, which was controversial in the beginning and virtually at the end as well.
How about greatest accomplishment as Secretary of Defense?
You know, that's a tough one to say. I would say that the greatest accomplishment was reversing the decline in spending, increasing the compensation and pay for the men and women serving us. I would say introducing more reforms in the budgeting process, the procurement process in particular. And I would say lifting the morale of the men and women in uniform, and that I had a great deal of help from my wife Janet. She was the first lady of the Pentagon.
Yes.
And
what a great woman. Yeah.
And she loved traveling with me. We traveled some 800,000 miles, and it was just a great experience. We met with certainly the kings and the queens and the emirs, but the best part of the job was going out in the field or in the middle of the Indian Ocean, meeting with the troops and seeing them and being with them and just sharing moments with them while they were defending us. There was nothing greater than that.
Take a little break. Tell the folks at home, if you're just joining us, our guest is former Defense Secretary William Cohen. We've known each other, as he referenced at the top of the show, for quite a few years. He's the chairman and CEO of the Cohen Group. We're going to talk about that on the other side. This is America and the World. This is America and the World is brought to you by the National Education Association, the U.S. China Education Trust, and F.Y. Chang Foundation, guided by Ambassador Julia Chang Block, President. The League of Arab States, representing 350 million people in 22 member countries. ANA, Japan's largest airline with an extensive network throughout Asia. Japan, history, hospitality, and advanced technology. Sharing tomorrow. The Petroleum Group, expertise with integrity in the fields of oil and gas, exploration and production, energy, and infrastructure. The Republic of Kazakhstan, a rich history and a future of development and growth. The Rotendaro Family Trust. The Embassy Series, uniting people through musical diplomacy, presenting international artists in diplomatic settings. And Ventana Productions, television facilities, editing, and distribution services. Bill, if I can call you Bill.
You may.
Well, thank you very much. I think the last time we met was at an event where the United States India Business Council was celebrating, perhaps it was the visit of Prime Minister Modi from India. Tell us a little bit about the U.S. IBC and your involvement over many years in India.
Well, I became really involved following my departure from the Pentagon. Relations were rocky. Prior to that time, the Indian government had pursued a nuclear weapons program. Pakistan had followed. There were sanctions that were put on, and so the relationship was not really very good until President Clinton made that trip to India in 2000. I think it was 2000. And that really broke the ice from that point forward. And following that, George W. Bush certainly tried to pick up where, he did pick up where President Clinton had left off and energized that particular relationship. And then we had people like Nicholas Burns, Ambassador Burns, who became very much involved, as did I, and Secretary, I think then Senator Kerry, became involved in the civil nuclear agreement with India. In other words, authorizing and cooperating and helping them to produce more civilian nuclear power. And that became another breakthrough, at least in terms of the agreement. So I became very involved as a member of the board of the U.S. IBC. And since that time, I've put together a team and a terrific group of people in both India, here in Washington. And so we have tried to help companies who are doing business in India, but also Indian companies doing business in the United States. And I also serve on the with the Consolidated Industries of India, CII. And so I've been very active with those two organizations to try and promote much better trade relations and diplomatic relations as well with U.S. and India.
When the Prime Minister came here, it was kind of like a grand tour, and he was so well received. It signaled, I think, a kind of an improved relationship between the United States and India. Why is that relationship important?
Well, India is important because it's the second largest, maybe co-equal in population with China.
Yep.
It's a democracy. It believes in the rule of law. It has the English language, among many more. But there is an identification of issues, values, ideas, ideals, and interests that we share. And so a country of 1.2 billion people with the human capital that they have, they are now really emerging into this century in a much more aggressive, and I mean that in a positive way, in terms of their international engagement with other countries. And so they're going to be a major powerhouse in the years to come. So it's important that the United States have a good relationship. It's unlikely we'll be called allies because they are a non-aligned country. And for the foreseeable future, I'm sure they're going to try to maintain that non-alignment status, which doesn't mean that we can't be partners. Doesn't mean that we can't have a relationship based on these shared interests. And so it's critically important because it's going to be a major player in the global affairs. It is today.
So one of the things that I gathered that Modi has said, you mentioned democracy, poverty he wants to attack. Certainly that's a horrible situation there. But also economics and trade. So I would gather that opens up a tremendous opportunity for U.S. business to invest there and for their folks to come and invest here.
It's happening now. It's happening now. There are also issues. There's an issue of corruption in terms of some of the larger provinces that has to be dealt with. He's focused on that, by the way. And there's another issue that's involved, and that is, we both have democracies, we both have bureaucracies, but penetrating the Indian bureaucracy has been even tougher than their.
I was going to ask you, is it tough to do business there?
Well, it has been, and that's been part of the problem. And this is where Prime Minister Modi has really set a new tone in India and for all of the countries who want to do business with India and to have a relationship with it. His mantra is, we're open for business. Make in India is then another slogan, but they want to open up to the outside world because there's still some hangover from the Cold War. They were not aligned, but their relationship with the Soviet Union, former Soviet Union, we were seen as being on the opposite sides of that equation. And then we went through a period following the civil nuclear agreement in which our aspirations or expectations were so high, and then things went flat. We didn't partake in the nuclear development for a variety of reasons. We got a disagreement over how much liability should be absorbed, et cetera. And so that kind of went cold. And in fact, when I was there, I said, we've been through this in our own country, but you remember when President Carter said that there was a malaise in America and how that came back sort of to haunt him.
Yes.
But there was a malaise that, from my perspective, in India for the past 5 or 6 years. It was simply no energy.
Interesting.
There was no energy. There was no real direct engagement with the United States. And things went flat. In fact, you had major CEOs saying, I don't think I want to invest anymore in India. It's too hard, they don't want to do business, etc. So it went flat for about 4 or 5 years. Prime Minister Modi comes in and says, we're going to do things differently. We're going to tear down some of the barriers. We're going to open up. We're going to do what I was able to do in Gujarat. And that is a business-friendly environment, and we're going to do that nationwide. And when I was in Delhi just before...
That's the area he came from, right?
Yes.
And very successful.
Very successful.
He was governor.
And that's because he was promoting business, and that's how you generate prosperity, and that's how you lift people up. And I think that message, it was almost tangible when I was there just before Thanksgiving, and I could feel it in Delhi. I could feel that all the ministers and others that I met with, they're saying, we're ready, we're open. Let's do business. Now, whether that's just a honeymoon period that he is on, or that we think that we're going to share in the celebration, it may not materialize. But I think if he is able to achieve 1 or 2 of his major objectives on the poverty side, opening up for trade, reduce some bureaucracy, if he can do 1 or 2 of those three big things, that will set a tone. I think it'll put them on a path to really bring about a lot of economic improvement for the people, but also a bigger role for India on the global stage.
So you and your team, if I understand it correctly, when a U.S. company wants to do business there, they got to play politics. There's politics is involved, business regulations and partnerships are involved, and also kind of getting their name out in some way. So media is involved. So do you help the businesses
do all of that?
All of that. And what kind of businesses would you be working with?
All kinds. I'd say 80% of the business in the Cohen Group is non-defense or aerospace. Most of it is in the private commercial sector, from pharmaceuticals to telecommunications to agriculture to oil and gas services to media to private equity, hedge fund. I mean, we do everything.
Wow.
And so we help companies, major Fortune 100, 500 companies do business in India, but also Indian companies doing business here.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. Are there a lot of Indian companies so far invested in the United States? Because we're a terrific market as well.
We are. Well, there's one Indian company who sees the United States as an emerging market for him.
Isn't that?
And so we have some really big companies that we represent from India who do business here and are investing here. And so, yes, they see the United States as a real opportunity as well.
Let me take advantage of the fact that we talked a little bit about your service on the Hill in both the Congress and in the Senate. Washington, one of the reasons we morphed from this is America to this is America in the world is because nothing was getting done up there. It was so adversarial. Republicans and Democrats, liberals and conservatives were really disrespectful to each other, enemies. Gridlock, which was not representative of what the people of the United States wanted their government to be doing. Is there any hope now? Now we got a Republican Congress and a Democratic president. Any hope?
Think for the next 2 years, probably not much will take place.
Is that right? Oh, I'm so sad.
No, I think there's going to be posturing on both sides.
Is that right?
Yeah. And it's discouraging for me since I spend a lot. I'm also on the U.S. China Business Council, so I spend time in China and elsewhere. I spend a lot of time in the Gulf states. It's difficult for me to go to foreign countries and say, we want you to be more like Mike. We want you to be more like the U.S.
They must look at us like we're crazy.
And they say, be like you?
Yeah.
You can't make a decision.
Yeah.
And it's a tough part to explain to them why democracy, why giving people a voice and participation in the affairs of their country isn't producing positive results. I mean, there are positive things taking place in the private sector, but from a governmental point of view, they look at what we're doing to each other, saying you can't make a decision on big issues. You're not making decisions.
But you just drove a dagger in my heart when you said expect. But here's the question. You got 100 senators. You got 435 or 437, whatever Congress people. Can't you get them all in the room and just say, you know, it's got to stop?
You would think so, but let me give you an example of why this has not been taking place. You would think with 535 members, you say, okay, you got 535 people who represent a very diverse country. Different population, different rural, urban, black, white, ethnicities. It's really diverse. So you expect you're going to have some conflict in terms of reaching decisions. But let's say you now have put just 12 people in a room, and you say, you 12 people, 6 Republicans, 6 Democrats, come up with a recommendation on how we can reduce our debt by $1.2 trillion over 10 years. And the 12 people couldn't agree. And so you say, then you had this thing called, you know, across-the-board cuts, just sequester, which is a terrible thing. Terrible for many programs in the civilian side of things, but also for the military. Just having across the board, so you have no discretion on how you're going to match your requirements and your missions with your spending. But 12 people couldn't reach an agreement, so it was very discouraging from that perspective. And I think there's been some progress made since that time, but now with the 2014 elections, you're seeing people who are coming in who are even more rigid, on both the right and the left. Now you've got President Obama's in a position where he can try to reach out, which he's indicated he wants to do, to say, okay, we've got 2 more years. The world continues to spin faster and faster. We can't afford to have everything in neutral here, fighting with each other. We've got some big trade issues coming up, Trans-Pacific Partnership issues.
Huge.
Investment treaty with the EU, trade and investment treaty. We have big issues coming up, and we need to find a way to compromise, which has become a 4-letter word up on the hill, so to speak. But I don't know. I remember Speaker Boehner, and I like him a lot, but I remember when he first took over as Speaker, he said, I will never compromise my principles, but I am willing to search for common ground. And I think part of the problem is he's got to deal with people on his right to say no compromise. Well, that's what life in America is really all about. When you have so much diversity, you have to reach compromise. Now, whether you call it compromise or common ground, it has to be done. And I think he wants to do it. He's being pulled further and further, barely got through an election this time. But I think he's the kind of Republican who can make, quote, deals as such, compromise, working out the diverse philosophies in our country and reach some kind of common ground. Has to be done.
I didn't know all-state basketball player, both high school and college. Latin and Greek were your studies?
Latin was my principal, and Greek literature was my...
And BU Law School. Your dad and your mom, interesting backgrounds. Irish Protestant, your mom, and your dad?
Jewish.
And was he an immigrant? Or
no, his dad was.
His dad was.
Yes,
But that family. Now, put those together. Were there brothers and sisters?
There were. You mean my dad had?
No, you in your.
Oh, my family, sure. Yeah, I had a younger brother who unfortunately has passed away, and I have an older sister.
Okay.
Marlene.
What was the biggest lesson that you might have gotten from your folks that have kind of helped you as you've progressed along?
Well, my dad, my father, a man of great complexity, is Ruby Cohen. He worked 18 hours a day, 6 days a week.
The bread?
Making bread. And I don't think he ever made more than $8,000 or $9,000 a year in his entire life. And he worked 18 hours every single day but one. And so hard work, discipline, and also honesty. I saw in him a man who worked hard, and yet he would help people coming off the street who couldn't afford to pay a nickel even for a roll, and he would provide them with food. So he was really honest, and those are the virtues. My mother was a strict disciplinarian, she's Irish to the core, but she was a woman of great pride. And so it was honor, pride in oneself, and coming from very humble origins. Growing up, and married to one of the most beautiful women in the world, with Janet Langhart. So it's another mixed marriage. So I would say it's having been on the outside, because being half Irish and half Jewish, I like to joke, I'm the only guy who could be on the Israeli border and get shot at from both sides.
I've never heard that.
And I joke about it because my dad wanted me to be brought up Jewish. I spent 6 years in Hebrew school, and there were problems in terms of my mother not willing to convert. And so I found that carrying a quintessentially Jewish name, being considered to be by Jewish people to be a goyim, which is a non-Jew, and by the goyim, or the non-Jewish people, to be a Jew. And that was a challenging experience as a young boy. And I think it made me at least more independent, so that I was operating outside the conventional situation. It made me more independent, I think. You're independent if you come from Maine to begin with, but I think given the fact that I was on the outside as a young person, neither accepted by either ethnicity as such, was a real challenge.
Boy, we're at the end of our time. And I was thinking about you, Watergate way back when, and how you stepped up to the plate as a Republican in that. Iran-Contra, you were involved. The various committees and subcommittees, that intelligence, oversight, armed forces, armed services. What a tremendous service you've given to this country. And I'm just, on behalf of all of the people who watch our program, I want to thank you for your service to the
what
country.
a tremendous opportunity I've been given. I mean, to think about, and this is the American dream, is it not, that you can start from the very lowest of stations in life and be as good as you can be. Thanks.
Bill, good to be with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dennis.
Thank you. For information about This Is America and the World, and to watch all of our programs, visit our website, thisisamerica.net, and look for us on Facebook and Twitter. This Is America and the World is brought to you by the National Education Association, the U.S. China Education Trust, and F.Y. Chang Foundation, guided by Ambassador Julia Chang Block, President. The League of Arab States, representing 350 million people in 22 member countries. ANA, Japan's largest airline with an extensive network throughout Asia. Japan, history, hospitality, and advanced technology. Sharing tomorrow. The Petroleum Group, expertise with integrity in the fields of oil and gas, exploration and production, energy, and infrastructure. The Republic of Kazakhstan, a rich history and a future of development and growth. The Rotendaro Family Trust. The Embassy Series, uniting people through musical diplomacy, presenting international artists in diplomatic settings. And Ventana Productions, television facilities, editing, and distribution services.